Hello and welcome to this week's advanced guide taking a look at team setups for the Battle of Kyhlo. For other guides to other maps, check the description and subscribe for even more guides. Kyhlo is a map that forces teams to often rely heavily on their members' own individual merits, as there are so many things to do. 3 control points to fight over, a trebuchet to defend and use, and the enemy's trebuchet to destroy. All this creates some very interesting team setups and strategies, but first I'll run you through a very basic one. So first up, the trebuchet user should be a mesmer. This is because of the portal tactic, which allows them to repair the trebuchet very quickly. If you want more info on this, check out a guide to portals. Mesmers are also great 1v1, so all round they make a great trebuchet controller. Secondly, you need a good strong bunker on the clock tower with some solid knockbacks. They also need to be able to deal with trebuchet fire, so high toughness and HP are a must. I like Guardians for this because the hammer has some great skills for controlling this node. Guardians also have great stability uptime, which is very important on the clock tower. Next up, your near point defender. Someone who's capable of defending themselves effectively is needed here, and killing power isn't a big focus, but survivability is. Elementalist bunkers are great at this. The next required role is a roamer. This player will be in charge of bringing down the enemy trebuchet, so direct damage is a must and they need a lot of it. The last role comes down to your team's decision. This can be a far point attacker, but that spreads your team very thin and makes it hard for players to support each other. There are some team setups that will also take big advantage of this. The second option, and more popular, is to add a second roamer. They can help around the enemy trebuchet and base as well as supporting mid. Keep in mind though that the roamer will need to push the far point at times to make sure the enemy has someone there to defend it. So that's a basic team setup. It's very reliant on everybody performing their role. If one member is being outplayed, it falls apart very quickly and you'll have to adapt. Fights on Kyhlo often come down to individual skill of players, and one weak link can really cost you a victory and cause a lot of problems on this map, more than others where it's possible to move around faster. So first up, I want to run you through a defensive build that involves bunkering down and trying to keep their trebuchet out of action. For this, you abandon your treb and put 2 bunkers on the middle node. One guardian is a good idea, and the second player bringing a little bit more damage to give them more options for kills. The near point defender remains the same, while you have a roamer and far point attacker. The far point attacker brings a solid tanky build, while the roamer will focus on killing their trebuchet and ganking players coming out of their base when they can. This setup doesn't give you many kills, but instead focuses on getting and holding all 3 of the nodes. From time to time you will lose the far node and it'll have to be recaptured with the far point attacker and the roamer assisting. The weakest point to this build is if the enemy team kills your roamer and keeps their trebuchet up, they'll be able to bring players with trebuchet support to the far node and mid node to take them back quickly. To counter this happening, the far point attacker from your team should abandon their node and fall back and help support the mid until the roamer has respawned and brought their trebuchet back down. This makes it much harder for the enemy to make much progress. They will take their node back, but they'll struggle at the clock tower against 2 solid bunkers and 1 hybrid. It's also a good point to bear in mind that your near node is also vulnerable. It's unlikely that they'll attack it in the early game because of this team setup, but later game they might, and you may have to fall back your far point attacker right the way across the map to defend there as well. This next team setup is a lot more offensive. We take the basic setup from before, but we replace the near side defender with a mesmer using a portal, blink, and has access to swiftness. They can use these skills to very quickly move from their node to the mid to support there. This in turn allows the roamers more freedom, as they're needed less at the central node. They can keep their trebuchet and the trebuchet user down, and against less skilled teams they can even spawn camp them. This setup is one of my personal favourites. The freedom it gives the 2 roamers is very important. It opens up more opportunities to not only keep the enemy trebuchet down, but also reduce pressure on your trebuchet. The roamers should avoid engaging enemy bunkers if they can. The guardian and mesmer with the trebuchet support can easily handle them. They should focus on the trebuchet user for the enemy team and their roamers. If the enemy leaves their near side node undefended, the roamers can certainly reverse cap it quickly. The weaknesses of this setup is that for the most part your trebuchet user cannot support your roamers, leaving them very open to being overwhelmed. If this does happen, it can cause problems at the central node and near side nodes as they're not heavily defended, and if your trebuchet falls they can easily both be lost. If the enemy is running a bunker heavy build, it can be very difficult to recover from this. To avoid this, roamers must fall back to the central node if they think they're going to be outnumbered and defend it with support from your trebuchet before pushing back out. The next setup works by being highly mobile. Your team will be collapsing on nodes to pick up quick kills before moving on. You'll have a mesmer on treb as expected and a guardian on mid. The other 3 roles are taken by roamers using very high mobility builds, including ground targeted teleportation skills. Thieves are great here, but I wouldn't recommend having them all like that. Having one a little bit tankier, for example a Scepter Dagger Ellie with cantrips, works very well. A Mesmer is also a viable option if you want a little bit more safety, and you can use portals to quickly return to nodes. These three will be working as individuals but also together. They'll be able to quickly move up the clock tower to help there, as well as to the outer points and the trebuchet. They'll be used in the walls and high ground a lot to avoid unwanted combat. You don't want to be caught in a skirmishing 1v1, you always want to be fighting on the nodes. They all roam around all three nodes, bringing critical mass whenever they arrive. This sounds difficult, but the speed players with teleportation skills can move around this map is quite something. They'll also be very slippery and able to avoid a capture by the enemy. The weakness of this build is that the Thief Roamers will be quite susceptible to trebuchet fire, seeing as they have so much area to roam. Keeping the trebuchet down 100% of the time will be very challenging. It's also not easy for teams which are not good with communication or following instructions. It's susceptible to being reverse capped as well, as you're going to be abandoning the near and far nodes often. If the Romans are stuck waiting for a node to capture, they can also be the focus of trebuchet fire. I'll just pop in here that if you are interested in the trebuchet and how it works, we do have guides on the subject, and I'm going to call that it for this episode. If you have any team setups of your own, why not post them below, and feel free to ask any questions and myself or someone else will certainly help you out. See you all soon.